Sheriff James Carter prided himself on maintaining order and justice in the small, peaceful town of Havenwood. A man of steadfast principles and unwavering loyalty, James was respected by all. He had built a life that seemed picture-perfect, a successful career, a loving wife, Emily, and 3 beautiful children who were the center of his world. However, beneath this veneer of tranquility lay a secret that would shatter his carefully constructed reality. It all began when James, encouraged by his wife, agreed to participate in a local ancestry project. The initiative aimed to explore the genetic roots of Havenwood's residents, a project that many found intriguing. The promise of discovering distant relatives and uncovering familial ties intrigued James as well. He submitted his DNA sample, never suspecting the life-altering revelations it would bring. When the results arrived, James was eager to delve into his family's history. He skimmed through the report, noting connections to distant cousins and ancestral origins. Only 5% of those who watch my videos are subscribed. If you are enjoying my contents, please subscribe, as this helps me a lot. Thank you, and enjoy this video. But as he read further, his heart began to pound. The document contained an anomaly, a discrepancy that could not be ignored. The DNA markers indicated that his 3 children were not biologically his. The stark reality hit him like a freight train. Each of their genetic profiles pointed to a different paternal lineage, one that led directly to his estranged brother, Daniel Carter. James stared at the report, his mind racing with disbelief and confusion. The implications were too staggering to process. How could this be possible? The children he had raised, loved, and cherished were not his by blood. A wave of nausea washed over him as he struggled to comprehend the betrayal hidden within the sterile lines of the DNA report. The memories of his life with Emily began to replay in his mind like a haunting film. Their courtship, marriage, the births of their children, all moments that had defined his identity as a husband and father, were now tainted by a harrowing truth. How long had she known? Was their entire relationship built on a foundation of lies? James's thoughts shifted to Daniel, his younger brother. Daniel had always been the wild one, the black sheep of the family. He was charismatic yet irresponsible, a drifter who never seemed to settle down. Their relationship had been strained for years, marked by jealousy and unresolved tensions. Now, the revelation that Daniel had fathered his children felt like the ultimate betrayal, a dagger to the heart of their already fractured bond. James recalled the last time he had seen Daniel. It had been at a family gathering years ago, a strained affair filled with awkward silences and forced smiles. Daniel had shown up uninvited, his usual cocky demeanor masking whatever turmoil lay beneath the surface. James had dismissed him then, viewing him as little more than a nuisance. Now, that distant figure loomed large in his life once more, his presence felt in the very blood of his children. Desperate for clarity, James confronted Emily. The confrontation was a storm of emotions, a cacophony of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. Emily, caught off guard by the DNA results, broke down in tears. She admitted to the affair, her voice trembling with guilt and regret. It had happened during a rough patch in their marriage, a time when James was consumed by his work and emotionally distant. Daniel had been there, offering her the attention and comfort she craved. Emily's confession did little to quell James's fury. The affair had not been a fleeting mistake, but a prolonged deception, one that had resulted in the births of their children. James felt his world crumbling around him. The foundation of trust he had built with Emily was gone, replaced by a chasm of betrayal that seemed impossible to bridge. The revelation had far-reaching implications, not just for James and Emily, but for their children as well. How could he tell them? How could he explain that the man they called Uncle Daniel was, in fact, their biological father? The thought of shattering their innocence with such a painful truth was unbearable. James found himself grappling with a myriad of emotions. The betrayal by Emily and Daniel cut deep, but there was also a profound sense of loss. He mourned the life he thought he had, the family he believed was his. Every moment of joy, every milestone, now felt tainted by the knowledge of the truth. Despite the chaos, James knew he had to confront Daniel. He needed answers, and he needed to face the man who had upended his life. Finding Daniel proved to be a challenge. True to form, Daniel had slipped through the cracks of society, living a transient life that made him difficult to track. James used every resource at his disposal, leveraging his position as sheriff to gather information on his brother's whereabouts. Eventually, his persistence paid off. Daniel was located in a seedy motel on the outskirts of a neighboring town. The confrontation between the brothers was inevitable, a storm brewing on the horizon. James drove to the motel, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. The man who had shared his childhood was now the architect of his family's undoing. When James arrived, he found Daniel lounging in a worn-out chair, a beer in hand, and a smug expression on his face. The sight of him ignited a fire within James. He demanded answers, his voice laced with a fury that had been building for weeks. Daniel, unfazed by his brother's anger, admitted to the affair with a casual indifference that only fueled James's rage. Daniel's justification was laced with bitterness. He had always envied James's life, the stable job, the loving family, the respect of the community. Seducing Emily had been his way of leveling the playing field, a twisted attempt to assert control over a life he felt was unfairly out of reach. James could barely contain his anger. The confrontation escalated, the brothers hurling accusations and bitter truths at each other. It was a culmination of years of resentment and unresolved conflict. The meeting ended with James storming out, his heart heavy with the weight of betrayal. As James drove back to Havenwood, he knew that his life would never be the same. The secret of his children's true parentage hung over him like a dark cloud, casting a shadow on every aspect of his life. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with emotional and moral dilemmas that would test the very core of his being. The revelation of his brother Daniel's betrayal and the truth about his children left Sheriff James Carter grappling with an internal storm of emotions. He reached the internal storm of emotions. The once unshakable foundation of his life had been cracked wide open, and he knew he had to confront the situation head-on. His first priority was Emily, the woman he had loved and trusted for so many years. The confrontation would not be easy, but it was necessary. James spent the night restless, lying awake in their bedroom, the memories of happier times flooding his mind. He thought about the early days of their marriage, the birth of each child, and the family moments he had cherished. He went to all those moments now seemed tainted, viewed through the lens of betrayal. The next morning, with a heavy heart, he approached Emily. Sitting across from her at their kitchen table, James laid out the DNA results. Emily's face paled as she read the report, her hands trembling. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized the magnitude of what had been uncovered. James's voice was steady but cold as he demanded answers. "How long have you known, Emily?" His question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their shared history. Emily wiped away a tear, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know for certain until now. I suspected, but I convinced myself it couldn't be true." James's jaw tightened. "You suspected? And you said nothing?" Emily looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "I was scared, James. I was scared of losing everything. The affair. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I didn't think it would come to this." James felt a surge of anger. "A mistake that spanned years? A mistake that gave us 3 children?" Emily's sobs filled the room. "I never meant for this to happen. Daniel was there when you weren't. It started during a time when we were struggling, when you were so distant. I was lonely, and he was manipulative." James's heart ached at the mention of Daniel. The brother he had once protected and cared for had betrayed him in the most intimate way. The pain of the affair was compounded by the knowledge that it had been his own flesh and blood who had fathered the children he had raised as his own. "I trusted you, Emily," James said, his voice breaking. "I trusted you with my heart, with my life." Emily reached out, her hand trembling. "I love you, James. I always have. The affair ended years ago, and I chose you. I wanted our family, our life together." James pulled away, his trust shattered. "But now I have to live with the truth, and so do our children." The mention of their children brought a fresh wave of pain. James knew that their innocence would be the hardest casualty of this betrayal. How could he tell them the truth without destroying their sense of self, their understanding of family? The thought of sitting them down and explaining the twisted reality of their parentage filled him with dread. In the days that followed, James tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for his children's sake. He went about his duties as sheriff, but his mind was clouded with the turmoil at home. The weight of the secret was unbearable, and he found himself withdrawing from those around him. One afternoon, his deputy, Sarah, noticed his distraction. She had worked alongside James for years and could sense that something was deeply troubling him. "A nun lives in this building," Sarah said, "and we find that something was deeply troubling him." Concerned, she approached him in his office. James appreciated her words, but he knew that the path he was on was one he had to navigate himself. The betrayal by his brother and wife had cut too deep, leaving scars that only time might heal. For now, his focus had to be on his children and how to protect them from the fallout of these revelations. Meanwhile, Daniel's presence continued to loom over James's life. Though he had left the motel without a confrontation escalating further, James knew that Daniel was not done. His brother had a penchant for causing trouble, and James had a sinking feeling that this wasn't the end of their entanglement. Daniel, on the other hand, reveled in the chaos he had caused. The confrontation with James had stirred something dark within him, a sense of power and control. He had always envied James's life, and now he had managed to infiltrate it in the most personal way possible. But Daniel's satisfaction was short-lived. His mind, already teetering on the edge, began to spiral further into darkness. Haunted by his own demons, Daniel became consumed with thoughts of revenge. He blamed James for his own failures, for the life he believed was stolen from him. The affair with Emily had been a way to assert control, but now he wanted more. His obsession grew, and he began to formulate a plan to take back what he thought was rightfully his. James remained vigilant, aware that Daniel's unpredictability posed a threat. The betrayal had already caused irreparable damage, but James was determined to protect his children from further harm. He knew that confronting the past was only the beginning. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was resolute in his commitment to his family, even as the ties that bound them were tested like never before. The days following the confrontation with Daniel were some of the most challenging James Carter had ever faced. The revelations about his family had cast a long, dark shadow over his life. Each morning he awoke with a heavy heart, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. The knowledge that his children were not biologically his, and that his brother was their true father, was a burden he struggled to carry. James's mind constantly raced with questions and fears. How could he continue to love and protect his children while knowing the truth about their parentage? Would they one day find out? And if so, how would they react? These thoughts haunted him, gnawing at his peace of mind. Despite the turmoil, James tried to maintain a facade of normalcy. He went about his daily duties as sheriff, patrolling the town, handling disputes, and overseeing the small department. Havenwood was a close-knit community, and James had always been a pillar of stability and trust. But now, even the familiar routines of his job felt hollow. His deputy, Sarah, noticed the strain. Though James had confided in her about the situation, the full extent of his emotional burden was evident in his every move. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and the usual spark of determination in his eyes was dimmed. One afternoon, as they were filing reports in the office, Sarah decided to broach the subject again. "James," she said gently, "have you thought about what you're going to do? About the kids, I mean?" James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Every day, Sarah. It's all I think about, but I don't have any answers yet. How do you tell children that the life they've known is built on lies?" Sarah nodded, her heart aching for her friend. "It's a tough situation, no doubt. But you're their father, James. Maybe not by blood, but by everything that matters. They need you now more than ever." Her words resonated with James, but they didn't ease the weight of the decision he faced. He knew Sarah was right. He was the only father his children had ever known. The bond they shared went beyond biology, and that thought gave him some comfort. They were the enchanters, and that thought gave him some comfort. And then he thought, but it didn't erase the pain of betrayal, or the fear of how the truth might one day affect his family. At home, Emily was a shadow of her former self. The guilt and regret were etched deeply into her face. She tried to engage with James, to seek forgiveness and rebuild the trust they had lost, but the distance between them was palpable. James couldn't bring himself to fully forgive her, not yet. The wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too raw. Emily focused her energy on the children, trying to preserve some semblance of normalcy for their sake. She played with them, helped with their homework, and maintained their daily routines. But even the children sensed that something was amiss. They noticed the tension between their parents, the quiet arguments behind closed doors, and the distant look in their father's eyes. One evening, as James was tucking his youngest, Lily, into bed, she asked him a question that caught him off guard. "Daddy, why are you and Mommy sad?" "Daddy, why are you?" James's heart ached at her innocence. He forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have things they need to figure out." Lily nodded, her small hand clutching his. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Lily," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Always." Those moments with his children were bittersweet. They reminded him of the deep love he had for them, a love that transcended any genetic link. Yet they also served as a painful reminder of the secrets he was keeping, the truths he couldn't yet bring himself to share. The weight of the burden began to take its toll on James's health. He struggled to sleep, plagued by nightmares and restless thoughts. His appetite waned, and he found himself increasingly irritable and short-tempered. The once strong and composed sheriff was unraveling, and he knew he couldn't continue this way. Seeking solace, James turned to the only other person who knew the full extent of his pain. Sarah. One evening, after a particularly long day, he invited her over to his home. The children were already in bed, and Emily had retired to their room, giving them some privacy. As Emily was settling into the warm bed, Caleb sat down on his bedside and grabbed her hand. Sitting on the porch, the cool evening air providing some respite, James opened up about his fears. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, Sarah. The kids deserve the truth, but I'm terrified of what it will do to them." Sarah listened, her heart heavy with empathy. "There's no easy way to do this, James. But you're strong, and you love them. That's what will get you through this. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it one day at a time." James appreciated her words, though they didn't provide the clear solution he yearned for. The burden of truth was his to bear, and the path forward was uncertain. But in that moment, with Sarah's unwavering support, he felt a glimmer of hope. A reminder that he wasn't entirely alone in this. As the days turned into weeks, James began to slowly rebuild his strength. He focused on the things he could control. Being present for his children, doing his best to support Emily, and finding moments of peace amidst the chaos. The road ahead was still daunting, but he was determined to face it head-on. The burden of truth remained a constant presence in his life. But James knew that his love for his children and his commitment to their well-being would guide him through the darkness. The bonds of family, though tested and strained, were not easily broken. And in the face of betrayal and heartache, James found the strength to keep moving forward, one step at a time. While James struggled to maintain some semblance of normalcy, Daniel was descending into a dangerous psychological spiral. The confrontation with his brother had reignited old resentments, and the fleeting sense of control he had gained from his affair with Emily quickly turned into an all-consuming obsession. Daniel was convinced that Emily still harbored feelings for him, and this delusion became the focal point of his thoughts. He began to stalk Emily, lurking near the Carter home under the cover of darkness. He watched her from a distance, his mind weaving fantasies where they would be together again. The sight of James with his children only fueled Daniel's twisted desire to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. His thoughts turned darker as he fixated on the idea of removing James from the picture entirely. The tension reached a breaking point on a cold autumn night. Daniel, driven by his growing obsession, broke into James's home, his mind clouded by delusions of reuniting with Emily. He hadn't anticipated James being home, and the confrontation escalated quickly. Emily's screams echoed through the house as Daniel lunged at James, a knife glinting in his hand. The struggle was brutal, fueled by years of unresolved hatred and betrayal. Emily tried to intervene, but Daniel's fury was unstoppable. In a fit of rage, he plunged the knife into James's chest. Emily's cries turned into screams of agony as Daniel turned on her, ending her life in a similarly violent manner. The double murder sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Havenwood. The news of Sheriff James Carter's tragic death, along with his wife Emily, left the town in mourning. the detractor of the law, left the town in mourning. The once peaceful streets were now filled with whispers of the horrific events that had unfolded. Deputy Sarah took charge of the investigation, her grief evident, but her resolve unwavering. The evidence quickly pointed to Daniel, but he had vanished. The community rallied together, providing support for James and Emily's children, who were now left orphaned. The manhunt for Daniel became a top priority. His face was plastered on every news outlet, his name synonymous with betrayal and murder. Sarah, driven by a personal vendetta, worked tirelessly to track him down. She combed through every lead, every tip from the public, determined to bring him to justice. The search led Sarah to a remote cabin in the woods. The air was thick with tension as she and her team surrounded the structure. The standoff was brief. Daniel, realizing his time was up, surrendered without a fight. His once smug demeanor was replaced by a hollow emptiness as he was taken into custody. Daniel's trial was a spectacle, drawing attention from all corners of the state. The courtroom was packed as the prosecution laid out the chilling details of his crimes. Witnesses testified about his erratic behavior and the deep-seated envy that had driven him to commit such heinous acts. Daniel's defense attempted to paint him as a victim of his circumstances, citing his troubled upbringing and mental instability. But the jury was unmoved by these arguments. The evidence was overwhelming, and the emotional testimonies of James and Emily's children left a lasting impact. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The town of Havenwood breathed a collective sigh of relief, though the scars of the tragedy would linger for years to come. In the aftermath of the trial, Havenwood began the slow process of healing. The Carter children were taken in by Emily's parents, who provided them with a loving and supportive home. The community rallied around them, offering comfort and assistance as they navigated their new reality. If you enjoyed this dive into the mystery, don't forget to subscribe to True Crime OCS for more chilling stories from history's darkest corners. Drop your thoughts, theories, and questions in the comments below. Let's untangle the truth together. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.